My name is Lalu Davies Yemerton, and you're listening to My Brother Podcast.
But DC was different when I went back this time. Because when I left DC in 1970, there was no home rule. When I got back in 1975, they had home rule. They had an elected mayor, elected black president of the city council, elected city council people. They had all of these elected officials now. And these elected officials mostly had been folks who were activists out in the community. They were folks out there fighting for the rights of the folks in the community, but now they were politicians. And anybody entering DC, certainly in my position, was viewed as somebody who must be coming back to run for public office. And so there was not a lot of willingness to be receptive to being supportive of what I was trying to do. So the next thing I had to do was to find a way to get them to have to deal with me. And so what I decided to do was to perform what we called a needs assessment for the District of Columbia. We picked the 9 to 11 lowest income census tracts. And I decided that we were going to survey 1 out of every 3rd households in each of those census tracts to ask them what they consider to be their problems and their needs and what they would select as solutions to those. And I said, we're going to do 3,000 households in this survey. Well, my staff was saying, well, wait a minute. How are you going to do 3,000 surveys? We don't have the people to do it. I said, I'll find the people. They said, well, we don't have the staff to do all the analysis. I said, the National Urban League has a research department right down the street. I'll get it done. Let's get the survey done. So we put together this survey. I went up and down the street with this sound truck telling folks that we are coming. We want to talk to you. We want to find out what your needs are. We want you to tell us what your needs are, what you will accept as solution to your need. Up and down the street, all over the media, we go up and doing this survey. I went to the campuses. I went to the organizations. I got Kappas and Alphas and AKAs and Deltas. I got students. I went to, because these some of these pretty rough neighborhoods. We got 600 volunteers, but most of them were women. So then I became concerned about sending women into some of these neighborhoods. So I said, okay, I went to the Masons and organizations like that. And I said, here's what I want from you. I'm going to put all these folks out in these neighborhoods. Some of these neighborhoods may be a little frightening to them. So I'm asking you to dress up in your uniform. And your job, you don't have to do the survey. Your job is simply to escort them into these neighborhoods. That's all you have to do. On a given Saturday, we dumped 600 people out into those census tracts, knocking on every 3rd household. And we'd been telling people we were coming. People that we were going every 3rd household, people we were skipping over were getting mad because they weren't being included. But we got these 3,000 households in a weekend. Got all this data. And my staff said, now what are you going to do with it? I said, put it in a box, load it up, put it in my car. I drove down to the National Urban League Research Department. The guy who ran it was a guy named Bob Hill. I took those boxes in. I said, all right, Bob Hill, you're supposed to be a hotshot researcher. Here's the data. Tell me what I got. They did. In fact, But when I told Bob I was doing 3,000 households, he said, you don't need to do 3,000 households. They do national polls. They only do 1,500. I said, yeah, but we have to over-survey to get credibility in this town with these quote unquote activist politicians now, because I know what they're saying. You don't need to tell me what we need to do. I've been out there just like you. I said, I need to show them that this is not me saying it. This is what the people are saying their needs are. So when we got the report done, we called it SOS 76. We released it the weekend of the 200th anniversary of the nation, 1976. And when we released it, the media went, wow. They started calling up politicians, these new elected officials. What are you going to do about what these folks are saying their needs are and what they will accept as solutions? And the only response the mayor could give, the city council could give, we're going to work with the Urban League on dealing with this. That's how we got included back into the mix in Washington, D.C. And so that is how I relaunched my career in D.C. And I was there for another 4.5 years, when one day I was in New York and Vernon Jordan, I was at the National Urban League office, and Vernon Jordan saw me, and he asked me if the people from Booz Allen had come to see me. And I said, no. He said, oh, they have to see you. And I was like, okay. And it turned out that the National Urban League was having a management study done on the headquarters organization. And Booz Allen was doing this study. And Booz Allen was interviewing various local urban league executives. And Vernon called them and told them they had to talk with me. So when they came to talk with me, they said, we had planned to talk with you, but we had divided up the people we wanted to talk to into two groups. A group we talked to before we did the report, and a group we talked to after we did the report. You were in the after group. And I said, okay. They said, but Vernon insisted we talk with you, so here we are to talk with you. So we met. When that study was completed, Booz Allen came out with one principal recommendation, and that was the National Urban League needed to create a position of executive vice president, chief operating officer, to come in and run the organization on a day-to-day basis while Vernon was running around the country shaping national thought. And I'm told, they said, and you ought to try to get that little guy down in DC to come and do this job. So one day I get a call from Vernon, and he invited me and my wife up to New York to spend a weekend with him. Now, I really didn't know Vernon that well. I knew his wife a lot better because she was a student at Howard when I was there. She was a year behind me. She was in my wife's class at Howard, and she had dated a fraternity brother of mine while I was there. So I knew, and I had stayed at her home when I went to the Kappa conclave in Atlanta, because her boyfriend, who was our fraternity brother, was going to stay at her home, and we were good friends. So I got invited to stay at her home too. So Vernon invited us up, and we went up to spend the weekend with Vernon and his then wife, who's now deceased, Shirley. And we were there Friday, and all day Friday we just hung out, and Saturday we just hung out. Sunday we get up, and Vernon is fixing breakfast, and he brings up this job he wants me to come and do. And when he finished outlining how he was going to structure the organization to accommodate this new position, he said, I want you to come and do that job. And I said, you know what, Vernon, you're the CEO. You can structure your organization any way you choose. I just won't work in that structure. So I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to eat your breakfast. I'm going to collect my wife, and I'm going back to DC. He said, well, what's wrong with the structure? I said, Vernon, you can't give me the people you don't like and you keep all the people you like and think that I'm going to have some standing in the organization. I said, but it's your organization and you can structure it the way you choose. I just won't work in that structure. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to eat your breakfast, collect my wife. I'm going back to DC. I did. Now, Vernon isn't used to people saying no to him, evidently. And so one day, a couple of months or so later, he calls me up at 6 o'clock in the morning. He said, all right, John Jacob, we'll do it your way. And that's when I decided to accept the offer. But here's what motivated me to be willing to leave the Washington Urban League. Because Vernon wasn't going to pay me much more money than I was already making. But one day, the chairman of the board of the Washington Urban League came to my office around 5 o'clock. And he said, don't leave. The board and I, we're going to meet. We want to do your appraisal. And we want to discuss it with you when we finish. I was like, oh, okay, sure. And so I'm sitting in my office waiting to be called in for a discussion of this appraisal. And I finally look at my watch, it's almost 8 o'clock. And I'm saying to myself, wait a minute. What could they possibly be discussing for 3 hours? So he finally comes back up and he says, I don't want you to think it took us 3 hours to do the appraisal. He said, the appraisal took about 10 minutes. He said, the rest of the time, we've been trying to figure out how much more money we can afford to pay you. And when he said that, what ran through my mind is that, wait a minute, if it took him 3 hours this year, it'll take him 3 days next year. It'll take him 3 weeks the following year. This probably means that I have plateaued out at what a community-based organization can afford to pay me. And if this community-based organization can't pay me anymore, there are not any other community-based organizations who can pay me anymore. So what this probably means is that I need to start figuring out how I can get transferred into the for-profit sector. And I can't do that in DC because this is a government town. Yeah. So I need to get to a place where I can get discovered. So when Vernon came back with the offer, I said to myself, wait a minute, I'll go to New York and I'll get discovered because that's where all of American corporations are headquartered. Somebody will be smart enough to discover me. So I accept the position and we moved to New York. Now, my wife is an accountant by training and she was working. She was an accountant at Howard University. So to go to New York, I'm going from a 2-salary household to a 1-salary household. So I'm making a big sacrifice financially to take this position, but we go. And I assumed this position of Executive Vice President, Chief Operating Officer. I arrived in February 1979. On May 30, 1980, Vernon Jordan in Fort Wayne, Indiana, was shot in the back by a racist assassin who laid out in the weeds waiting for him to exit a car. And he had moved from Birmingham, Alabama, and he had tracked Vernon all across country to Fort Wayne, Indiana. And this guy was so racist, wherever he saw integrated couples, he would just shoot them. And on that night in Fort Wayne, and by the way, how Vernon came to his attention, Vernon had done a speech in Birmingham, and on the front page of the newspaper was a photograph of Vernon and a white couple, a man and his wife, but Vernon had his arms around the man's wife in the photograph. This guy had tracked him all the way across the country, laid out, and had shot somebody in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And as he moved around, if he saw an integrated couple, he would shoot him. And I get this call early in the morning. My phone was ringing, and my wife, my home office was across from my bedroom, and my wife wakes me up and she said, "Your phone's ringing." And I go to the phone, and this voice comes on and says, "Vernon Jordan gave me this number and told me to call you and tell you he's been shot." I said, "What? He's been shot? So how bad is it?" "I don't know. He just," as they were rolling him out, he handed me this piece of paper and told me to call you. And so I sat there in my office because I know I've got to get to Fort Wayne. And it occurred to me that there was one person on the board of the National Urban League who had an airplane. He was the chairman of Norton Simon, a guy named David Mahoney. And I waited until about 6 o'clock to call David's house. And he lived on Fifth Avenue in New York City, in a co-op. And the switchboard answered the call. And I asked to speak to Mr. Mahoney, and the switchboard operator said, "You'll have to call back at 8 o'clock. I said, "No, I can't wait until 8 o'clock. They said, "We're not going to wake him up this early. We're not going to call up there this early. You have to call back." I said, "No, I can't wait." For some reason, his wife picked up the phone. And when she answered the phone, I told her who I was and why I was calling David, because Vernon Jordan had been shot. David and Vernon were very good friends. That's how I met David. And so when she put David on the phone and I said, "Vernon has been shot," David said, "Hold on." And it seemed like an eternity, but when he came back to the phone, he said, "You know, I flew in from California late last night. I took sleeping pills. So you got to tell me again what you're talking about." I said, "Vernon's been shot, Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I need to get to Fort Wayne." And David said, "Meet me at your office at 7 o'clock. We'll be wheels up by 8. And so I lived in Westchester County, New York, in Hartsdale. I had to get to 62nd and York in Midtown, but I make it into the city. When I get there, David is already there pacing in front of the building. And before I could even go in the door, he said, "Get in." And we head out to Teterboro to grab his plane and head to Fort Wayne. Turned out to be one of the nicest guys I've ever done anything with. And David said, "You have any business cards?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Give me some, because from now on I work for you." And so we get to Fort Wayne. Vernon Jordan had a hole in his back big enough to put your fist in it. The guy had shot him with a hunting rifle that had to come through a chain link fence that just splattered and cut a hole in his back big enough to put your fist in it. And so Vernon was in this hospital in Fort Wayne, and I would run back and forth checking on him. But I had assigned a couple of guys in Fort Wayne from the office to watch over Vernon and to keep me informed on his condition. And every day they were calling me to tell me that they were getting ready to do another surgery on Vernon. Finally, one day, in sheer frustration, I picked up the telephone and I called up to Howard University School of Medicine to a Dr. LaSalle LaFalls. LaSalle LaFalls was chief of surgery at Howard University Hospital and headed up the program at the medical school. Now, I did not know him personally, and he did not know me personally. He may have known that I was vice chairman of Howard's Board of Trustees, but other than that, he really didn't know me. But when I called his office, his receptionist answered the phone and I asked to speak with him. And she put him on the phone. And when he came on, I said, Dr. LaFalls, you're a good friend of Vernon Jordan. And he said, I'm a good friend of yours. What can I do for you? And I said, I need someone to go to Fort Wayne, someone that I trust, take a look at Vernon and tell me what I need to do to keep this guy alive. He said, okay. He said, well, I'd like to do it on a day when I have some time. So let's plan on me taking a run out there on Sunday. I said, okay. When I hung the phone up, I got another call from Fort Wayne, one of the guys I had down there. And he said, hey, Jake, they're getting ready to do another surgery on Vernon. So I called LaFalls back. And I said, Dr. LaFalls, I can't wait until Sunday. I need someone to go now. He said, give me 30 minutes to rearrange my calendar. I'll grab a plane from Johnson & Johnson and I'll take a run out there today. He goes to Fort Wayne and he calls me back and he says two things. He said, one, we need to get Vernon out of this hospital. It's a nice hospital for Fort Wayne, but it is not a hospital to deal with this level of trauma. We need to get him into a place like New York Hospital Cornell Medical Center. He said, I'll make all the arrangements to get him in there. You got to figure out how you're going to get him to New York. And he hangs up. So I call back out to the guys I have in Fort Wayne. I said, call the White House and tell them that we need a medevac plane to transport Vernon from Fort Wayne to New York. Then I jump on Mahoney's plane and I fly back out to Fort Wayne. And when I get there, I said, did you get the plane for Vernon? They said, no. I said, why not? They said, well, President Carter is someplace and Ham Jordan is someplace, and we have not been able to get anybody that we, I said, wait a minute, guys. Why are we dealing with Carter and Ham Jordan on this? This is a job for Louis Martin. Louis Martin was the black guy in the White House. I said, give me the phone. I call Louis Martin. I say, Louis, I need a medevac plane to get Vernon from Fort Wayne to New York. He begins by saying, well, John, the criteria for getting a medevac plane, and I interrupted him. I said, Lou, if I could meet and I won't use the language here that I used on him, but if I could meet the criteria, I wouldn't be calling you. I mean, if I could meet the criteria, I wouldn't be calling you. I'm calling you because I need a plane. Get me a plane. He said, oh, call you back. So he called back. He said, your plane will be there on this day with Captain so-and-so as the captain of your plane, and he will get Vernon from Fort Wayne to New York. I called LaSalle LaFalls. I said, the plane is going to pick Vernon up on this date at this time to get him to New York. LaSalle gets back on a plane, flies back to Fort Wayne, meet that plane to pick up Vernon, flies with Vernon on that plane back to New York. And when Vernon arrived at New York Hospital Cornell Medical Center, it looked like a squadron of physicians descended on him. And Vernon is alive today because LaSalle LaFall stepped in and saved his life. And every time they scrubbed at New York Hospital, LaSalle LaFall was in the room. And so one Sunday, I went up to check on Vernon, and LaSalle LaFalls was there. And I said, Dr. LaFalls, when I called you and asked you to do this, I was not asking you to do this pro bono. Send me your bill. And he said, John, I cannot send you what doesn't exist. And never mentioned another word about it. And Vernon is alive today because of LaSalle LaFall. That was Vernon was in the hospital from May to September of 1980. And he came back to the office in September of 1980. And he worked all of the rest of 80 and 81. And after the national conference in 1981, we were both in the office that Thursday. The conference in those days ended on Wednesday evening. And most of the staff didn't come back to work until the following Monday. But I'm compulsive and Vernon is compulsive. So we were in the office on Thursday. And Vernon called down to my office and said, what are you doing for breakfast tomorrow? I said, I don't have any plans. He said, meet me for breakfast at the University Club tomorrow morning. And so I met him for breakfast that next day. And he began to tell me that he was going to leave the Urban League. Now, nobody just leaves the Urban League. And so I'm listening to this, Vernon, and I'm thinking, what is this? What's his problem? I said, I'm saying to myself, I've heard of this thing called male menopause. Maybe that's what he's going through. So let me help him work this out because I have work to do back at the office. And Vernon finally said, oh, Jake, you don't get it. No, I'm really leaving the Urban League. He said, I have been offered and I have accepted a partnership in a law firm in DC. He said, I've seen my office, I've ordered my furniture, and I started work on January 2nd. And then he said, and you ought to want this job. Now, keep in mind, I did not go to New York to become president of the National Urban League. It was never a part of my plan. It was never a part of my thought. Until he said that you ought to want this job. And what ran through my mind when he said that is, I have spent every second of every minute, of every hour, of every day, of every week, of every month, of every year for the past 17 years, doing nothing other than preparing myself to take on this responsibility at this point in time. And there is no one on the face of the earth who are better prepared to assume this responsibility at this time than I am. And I said, oh yeah, then I ought to want this job. I said, but Vernon, I will not campaign to get it. And he said, I'll handle it. I became president of the National Urban League, I'm convinced, because Vernon did indeed handle it. Because there were some folks who were far more prominent internationally and nationally than I was, who were candidates for that position. But Vernon, I was not going to campaign for it. It was not why I went to New York, and I was not willing to campaign for the job. But Vernon committed himself to that. And I got the job offer. Now, the day they made the decision, to show you how I was not preparing for it, I was at my house in Hartsdale, New York on a Sunday when I got the telephone call from the chairman of the board of the National Urban League saying, John, we've selected you as our president and we want you to come and meet with the board. And I said, then you'll have to wait, because I wasn't sitting here expecting this call. So I've got to get dressed to get into the city for the meeting. And I did. And when I met with the press, Vernon convened the media to introduce me to the media and to inform them that he was leaving and that I would be his successor. Some reporter asked me, what is the difference between you and Vernon Jordan? And I said, you mean besides Vernon being 6'5" and me being 5'6"? Then the difference is that Vernon is an attorney who by profession is an advocate, but who is in the social work business. And I am a social worker who's in the advocacy business. And that's how I launched my career in the National Urban League. But the day I walked into the office as president of the National Urban League, that very day I made a conscious decision that I would only do it for 10 years. And I made that decision based on the fact that Whitney Young died in his 10th year, and Vernon left in his 10th year. So 10 years seemed to be about right for this position. And I said, I'll only do it for 10 years. And as I set out to make the statement as to what would be my focus, my launch and focus as president of the National Urban League, I identified 5 areas principally that I would focus on. I said, 1, we're going to take a run at the high incidence of pregnancies of young Black teenagers. 2, we're going to address the plight of female-headed households. 3, we're going to deal with crime in the Black community. 4, we're going to deal with the political empowerment of our people. And 5, we're going to look at the education of our children. And folks will say, well, what does that have to do with civil rights? So here's what you need to understand, is that the number one reason for girls dropping out of school, Black girls, is teenage pregnancy. When you look at poverty in the Black community, 70% of female-headed households in the Black community are living in poverty. When you look at crime in our community, it is something that we cannot depend on folks from the outside to come in and to try to address. And when you look at how you rearrange the power structure in this country, you do it through the ballot box. And oh, by the way, if we don't educate our children, we're not going to have a power structure to put out there. But I said those areas I want to focus on, because even if we could end discrimination by nightfall, those areas will still be problems in the Black community. And unless we're willing to take them on, nobody else will take them on. Now, folks said to me, why are you washing our dirty linen in front of white folks? I said, do you think that white folks don't know this? All you got to do is their research. they do research on this stuff all the time. And that they know what the problems are. They just have no desire to deal with them. I'm telling you, is that our challenge is to deal with these problems ourselves, because nobody else is going to do it. And so we launched all of these activities addressing those kinds of concerns. One of the things that I inherited from Vernon Jordan, though, that he was the first to do it, in my opinion. He was the first Black person to get selected for corporate boards out of a not-for-profit arena. And because he had done it, I was lifted up to be visible by those communities looking for board people. And so I got my first corporate board, and I became president in '82. I got my first corporate board in '83. The New York Telephone Company came looking and asked me to join their board. And so I went on the Coke board first, and then Continental Insurance came to see me and wanted me to join their board. So I joined the Continental Insurance board, and then Coca-Cola Enterprises came and I joined the Coke board. And then I ended up with 7 corporate boards before I retired. And it all resulted because Vernon had been out there first, and the Urban League looked like a good breeding ground for corporate board people because of the knowledge that we brought to the arena, but the way we performed in the jobs that we had. And I spent those 10 years shaping national thought, dealing with issues and concerns, and trying to move America forward in dealing with the plight of poor people in general, but Black poor people in particular. And one of the things that I propose is that's interesting when you look at the landscape today. I suggested that what America needed was a Marshall Plan for America. What America needed was an urban Marshall Plan, a Marshall Plan where we would rebuild the infrastructures in America, the schools, the bridges, the railways, the airports, and that we would do it in a way that everyone would win, not just Black folks. Everyone would win. Yes, Black folks would benefit from it because we would be able to get jobs, we would be able to get training, we would be able to get all of those opportunities. But to rebuild the infrastructure, you got to use the companies that are already out there. And there are no Black mega companies that can rebuild the airport, but they ought to be participants in rebuilding of the airport. And so we made this argument. And when I went before Congress to testify, they thought I'd lost my mind. They said, well, how much is it going to cost us? And I said, $50 billion a year over the next 10 years. Today, everybody's talking about rebuilding the infrastructure of America. And now the cost of doing it is trillions of dollars to rebuild the infrastructure. They thought I was crazy in the early 1990s. Today, it's Joe Biden's tune, it's Donald Trump's tune, it's everybody who's out there in a position of power who want to try to sell something is talking about rebuilding the infrastructure of America, because the infrastructure of America is crumbling. And it's more costly today to rebuild it than it was when I was proposing it, when they thought I had lost my mind. So in the 8th year of my 10th year of presidency at the National Urban League, I went in to meet with the leadership of the board to remind them that I had said to them that I would only do it for 10 years and that at the end of the 10th year, I'd like to leave. And they looked at me like, were you really serious? I said, nobody comes in and announce 2 years before they're ready to go that they want to go. They said, you're going to have to give us time to find somebody to replace you. That's how I ended up spending 12 years as president of the National Urban League. But when I announced that I was leaving the National Urban League, I really didn't have a job offer to go to. Yes, I had gone to New York to get discovered by corporate America. And yes, I was then serving on 6 corporate boards. That's why I knew I could afford to leave the Urban League, because I had these 6 corporate boards. I picked up a 7th board once I got to Anheuser-Busch. But I knew I wasn't going to starve. I could support my family. And so I announced I was going to leave and packed up to go. And one day I was at an Anheuser-Busch in St. Louis for an Anheuser-Busch board meeting. And the chairman came over to me and he said, Jake, I was in DC earlier today for a meeting at the Red Cross. And this guy from your board came over to me and he said, you know, your guy's leaving the Urban League. He said, I didn't know I was supposed to know you were leaving. So I said, no, I didn't know he was leaving. So the guy said to him, what does he plan to do? And August Busch, the chairman of Anheuser-Busch, said, if I didn't know he was leaving, how could I know what he's going to do? But he said to me, you know, as I sat in that meeting and as I got bored, it occurred to me that this guy is too valuable for me to let some other company get him. So he said, before you talk to any other company, I want you to come and talk with me. Now, frankly, I did not take that as being a job offer. And so I did not follow up on going to talk with him. But let me back up and tell you how the personality of how August Busch operates. When I received the call that Anheuser-Busch wanted me to join their board, the guy who called me said, Mr. Busch told me that he wants you to join our board. Would you be willing to do it? And I said, yes. He said, good. He called me back the very next day. And he said, we have a problem. I said, what's the problem? He said, we know that you are on the board of Coca-Cola Enterprises. We make cans for Pepsi. Would you be willing to give up your seat on Coke Enterprises to come on the board of Anheuser-Busch? And I said, absolutely not. He said, why not? I said, Coke was putting me on their board when nobody was putting me on the board. I said, I stick by my friends. He said, what do you suggest I tell Mr. Busch? I said, I suggest you tell him not to ask me. Then I get a call from Mr. Busch. And he said, I tell you what, if I would be willing to call Pepsi about this, would you be willing to call Coke about it? And I said, yes. So he said, give me a couple of days. A couple of days later, he called me back. Now, I knew the people at Pepsi because they supported the National Urban League. He called me back and said, I talked with the people at Pepsi. They said they can live with it. Now call your people at Coke. So I called the president of Coke, who was also the chairman of Coke Enterprises. And I explained to him that I had been invited to join the board of Anheuser-Busch. And he said, you know what, John? He said, we would never ask you to reveal confidential information on a competitor. And even if we did, we don't think you would. So yes, we can live with it. So I called him back. I said, Coke can live with it. And so I agreed to join the board. But I get a telephone call from the chairman's executive assistant when it's time for me to come to my first board meeting. And she said to me, Mr. Jacob, Mr. Bush invites out-of-town directors to stay at his home when they come in town for the board meeting. And I would think you would want to do that. And I was like, oh, okay. All right, I'll do that. She said, but I should warn you that Mr. Bush goes to bed early. I said, well, how early is early? She said, oh, around 8:30. I said, well, what do the other people do? She said, I guess they go to bed too. So I was like, oh, okay. So I go to my first board meeting. Here's the way Anheuser-Busch operated. When you come in town for the board meeting and you're staying at the chairman's home, you have dinner with the chairman. Well, it didn't take long for me to figure out that that's where the real meeting takes place, sitting around the dinner table, having dinner with the chairman. And that is what I did for all those years before I went inside the company. So I had a pretty good fix on the company, and he had a pretty good fix on me, because I was at those dinners when we were really discussing what was going on in the company. So when I get this call that they're going to set up this meeting for me to meet with the chairman, she said, well, when do you want to meet? And I said, well, I've got to be in Chattanooga on Thursday to do a speech Thursday night. I can come over Friday morning to meet with him. She said, Friday's a bad day for him. She said, but let me see what I can work out. So after I hung the phone up, I called her right back. And I said, because I had said to myself, I bet she's jumping through hoops because I'm a director of the company. So I called her right back and I said, let me explain something to you. It doesn't matter to me if I meet with him next week or next month or next year. I just don't want him to think I'm ducking the meeting. She said, okay. I said, here's an alternative. I've got to be in Indianapolis on Wednesday. I should finish around 2:30. I can come to St. Louis after that and meet with him Wednesday evening, or I can stay over Thursday and meet with him Thursday morning before I go to Chattanooga, or I can meet him wherever he's going on Friday and fly with him wherever he's going to have this discussion. She said, those are some pretty good alternatives. Let me see what I can do. She calls me back and she says, here's what we'll do. We'll send a plane to pick you up in Chattanooga at 1 o'clock. He's going to fly his own plane, and he wants you to meet him in Albany, Georgia. He wants you to go hunting with him for the weekend. Now, I had never been hunting before, and I said to myself, if I'm going to start, I don't want to start with him because he's more intense than I am, and he's a very good hunter. So I said to her, no, I don't think that'll work. She said, why not? I said, well, I've got to be back in New York on Saturday. She said, why? I said, because I have a meeting in New York. I got to get back to New York. She said, what time is your meeting? I said, what time is he going hunting? Yeah, I guess he's going hunting around 8 or 9 o'clock. I said, I know I can't do it because I've got to be back in New York by 10 o'clock. She said, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'll get back to you. She calls me back and she said, okay, we'll send a plane to pick you up in Chattanooga. He's going to fly his own plane to Albany, Georgia. You'll rendezvous with him in Albany. You guys can have dinner together to have whatever the discussion he wants to have. You keep the plane we're sending to pick you up, and that plane can get you back to New York for your meeting. I said, fine, that'll work. Then she faxed me the itinerary that says, plane will pick you up at 1. You'll rendezvous with him in Albany, Georgia at 2, hunting 2:30. Now, I don't even know how you dress to go hunting. I mean, I've never been hunting before. I don't even know how you dress. And so plane picks me up. I'm wearing my oldest pair of corduroys that I may have worn once. And I show up in Albany, Georgia. One of his sons takes a look at me and he said, "The thickets are going to cut you to shreds." I said, "Thickets?" He said, "Yeah, thickets. Where we're going out there, you got," I was like, "I don't know anything about thickets. I'm a city boy. I don't know anything about it." So his dad said, "Oh, give him a pair of chaps." So they grab a pair of chaps, they give me a pair of chaps. Then he says to me, "All right, Jake, I picked out a nice tame horse for you. And we're going to ride out to where we do this hunting." And I said, "August, I've never been hunting before. And I've only been on a horse once before. I have no desire to mix these two. I've concluded that rich people think that everybody does what they're doing." And he was like, "You've never been hunting before?" I said, "No." "You've only been on a horse once before?" "Yeah." "Well, have you ever fired a gun?" "Well, because I'm an old ex-infantry officer, airborne. Yes, I've fired a gun." So he says to his kid, "Give him a gun, but only give him one shell." So they give me a gun. They give me one shell. And we climb up on this wagon because they don't allow motorized vehicles where we're going. So we have to take this wagon out. And while we're riding the wagon, he says to me, "All right, Jake, while no one can hear what we're talking about, tell me what you plan to do since you're retiring." And here's why I know ignorance is bliss, because here was my stupid response. I said, "Listen, August, I have 6 corporate boards, none of which I'm prepared to give up. So between my corporate boards, what little retirement I'll pick up from the Urban League, what little consulting I might decide to do, I'm going to practice my putting." And he gives me this look. He said, "Well, let me tell you what I have in mind for you." He said, "You know, Mike Roydy is retiring." Now, Mike was a guy who'd been with the company for 44 years. If you've ever seen a Budweiser commercial, one of the most famous ones is that "This Bud's for You" was created during his reign in this position. And Anheuser-Busch only had 2 executive vice presidents, the chief financial officer and Mike Roydy. And so he said to me, "I want you to come and do that job." He said, "Now, if you don't take the job, I'm just going to bust up that unit and spread it out among all the other officers of the company. This is an offer just for you because I want you in this company. What do you say?" And I said, "Let me think about it. Let's shoot some birds." Well, we got off the wagon, and because I'm sure he thought that, who is this person who I give him this deal of a lifetime, and he said he wants to think about it. So we got off the wagon, and he says to me, "All right, let me explain this to you. Everything from 12 o'clock to 6 on the right is yours. Everything from 12 o'clock to 6 on the left is mine. So if something pops up in your zone, go for it. But otherwise, if it's in my zone, I'll take it." So a bird jumps up in my zone. I fire, and I hit it. he goes crazy because they only gave me one shell. He said, he got that bird? He hit that bird? Nobody gets a bird on that first shoot. Nobody gets a bird. He got that bird? Now, let me just say, it was the luckiest shot I've ever fired. But I said to him, this is hunting. I said, I'm retiring from hunting because hunting is too easy to me. So we get through this dinner, and I fly back to New York the next morning. And the first thing that I do is to go in my office and I call the highest ranking black guy at the company. Because A, he's the guy who introduced me to the company. Mm. And B, I did not want this guy to think that I would screw him out of a position. That's why I said, let me think about it. Because I was not going to have this guy who had been the person who brought me to the company in the first place to think that I had taken a job that he should have gotten. And so the first thing I did when I walked back into my home office was to pick up the phone and call him. And I said to him, your boss just offered me a job. He said, what's the job? I told him. He said, what'd you tell him? I said, I told him I would think about it. And he said, why? Do you have a problem with being rich? I said, no, I don't have a problem with being rich. He said, if you're worried about me, I know that they're not going to give me the job. Mm. So it wouldn't bother me if tomorrow I ended up reporting to you. So once I got comfortable that he was comfortable, I waited a couple of days and I called up the chairman and told him I would take the job. Now, one of the things he did, though, to announce my coming to Anheuser-Busch, he called a press luncheon to introduce me to the business press of all over the Midwest. And they all came because they'd never seen anything like this. You mean this black guy is coming into corporate America at an executive vice president level in this company from the Urban League, right? And so one of the first questions I got from some young white reporter was, Mr. Jacob, what make you think you can sell beer? And I said, if you think selling beer is hard, try selling freedom, justice, and equality in this America. So another young white reporter jumps up and says, Mr. Jacob, do you think you got this job because you're black? And I said, absolutely. So I'm sure they wanted somebody who was smart and capable and competent, and I'm all that. But they also had to want somebody who was black. You know why I know that? He said, how? I said, because America hasn't run out of smart white boys. Mm. They just wanted somebody who was smart and competent and capable. There are a bunch of smart white boys running around this building who would give their right arm for this job. They also had to want somebody who was black. The chairman who was managing this luncheon leaned over to me and he said, Jake, I knew you were bad. I just didn't know how bad you were. But that was my introduction to Anheuser-Busch. And so when I went inside of the company, first I knew something about the company because I had been on the board for 4 years. But my advice to young people going into an organization is wherever you are going, learn as much as you can about the organization. Learn as much as you can about the organization. So when I got inside the company, I was pretty astute about what this company was all about. And I inherited a large group of people. And when I got them together, and I looked out over the audience, there was not another black soul in the group. And so I said to them, you know, it is obvious to me that when this company talks about inclusion, the message evidently is so subtle that many folks don't get it. So let me help you out in my group. We got to get some black folks in this group. I mean, is that clear enough for you? I mean, let me just help you out. Since you talk about inclusion, let me just help you out. In this group, we got to get some black folks in this group. And so that's when we started getting black folks. But here's the key element, and this is when Mike Harding comes into play. I spent a lot of time with the chairman. I became his guy, his go-to guy, his guy who would get things done, his guy if he wanted a frank and honest response, who was not intimidated by who he was. This guy would give it to him. And so one day, and I flew a lot with the chairman. We spent a lot of time together. His family, my family, spent a lot of time. We were flying someplace one day. The chairman, the guy who ran the beer, the brewmaster, and in beer, brewmasters are at the pinnacle of a company. So the brewmaster, chairman, and I were flying someplace. And they were having a discussion. And the discussion about one of the guys who was having some health problems and some family problems. And he ran all the brewery operations. He ran all of the breweries. So he was in charge of all 12 breweries. And he was having this difficulty. And they didn't want to lose him, but they also felt that brewery operations was falling down and they wanted somebody who could come in and run it. And so they decided to have this conversation. The other thing about being black in these arenas is that folks tend to not notice that you're there. And so they're having this conversation between the two of them. So the chairman said to the brewmaster, you put together your list, I'll put together my list, we'll compare our lists, and we'll select somebody to bring in to run brewery operations. So I'm watching this process. When they finish, if they're about to have their discussion about their list, I said, hey guys, can anybody play in this game? And they're like, yeah, Jake, yeah. You have somebody you want to suggest? I said, yeah. He said, who's your guy? I said, Mike Harding. The chairman said, God damn, that's our guy. That's our guy. Now, how did I know Mike Harding was their guy? Because I was running in and out of those breweries with the chairman and the brewmaster on a regular basis. And anytime and every time we would come out of those meetings with the breweries, they would say to each other, he runs the best brewery in the system. Whenever we went into the Houston brewery, when we walked out of Mike Harding's brewery, they would say to each other, he runs the best brewery in the system. But yet, he did not make their list. But when I put his name on the list, they could not deny that he was their guy because they had been saying to each other. Now, what that really means is that, and I say this to young people, it's because you get invited to the fraternity house, it doesn't make you a member of the fraternity. And so somebody got to be around to help folks to understand that sometime you go outside the house. But you got to be in a position to do that. Somebody got to be inside to do that. And you know, and Mike was an outstanding performer. I mean, Mike had worked in the Newark Brewery, the St. Louis Brewery, the LA Brewery, and he was running the Houston Brewery, and he had an MBA. Mike was the epitome of excellence, but he didn't penetrate their thought because he wasn't in their fraternity. And so somebody has to help people inside the fraternity know that there's some people outside the fraternity that must be included. And so when I was retiring from AB, and the chairman and the president of the beer company and I, the three of us retired together. And the new management was coming in. And the new CEO came to see me. And he said, Jake, I want you to take a look at my management team. Tell me what you think about it. I looked at his list. And I said to him, this is an insult to me. He said, what? I said, it's an insult. He said, why? I said, there's not a black person on your list. He was like, oh God, Jake, oh man, how did I miss that? Oh man, oh, I don't know what I can do about it. I said, well, I can tell you what you can do about it. He said, what is that? I said, see Mike Harding over there running brewery operations? Mike Harding, the president and CEO of your can company, because he can run that too, and then make him a part of your management team. That's how Mike went over to run the can company. You see, part of leadership, part of management is developing the people in your group. See, what I did at Anheuser-Busch, I sent people back to school to get the degrees they needed to get the positions they should have. I mean, I made secretaries go back to school. I had a young woman to come to see me one day. I met her because she was Chinese, had grown up in the Cultural Revolution in China, when the Cultural Revolution ended, she was smart enough to graduate college and come to the US for graduate degrees and got her master's and PhD at Kansas State. And then came to AB to work in the lab and had been there for 15 years working in the lab. I met her because we were going to China and they sent her along to be our translator. And when we got back from China, she came to see me. And she said, Mr. Jacob, while we were gone, they eliminated my position. I said, you got to be joking. She said, yeah. I said, did they know that you were with the chairman and the executive vice president and in China on AB business as our translator? I said, yeah, they eliminated the position. So I sent for the guy who ran, the deputy for the lab. And I said, you eliminated this lady's job while she was gone? He said, did they do that? I said to him, why don't you make her a brewmaster? He said, well, we could do that, but she would have to be willing to start all over. I said, wait a minute. You're telling me that a person who has a PhD in serious science, who's been in the lab for 15 years, testing and examining our product, in order to become a brewmaster, she has to start over, jumping through all the hoops that you jumped through. I said, I know you take chemistry engineers right into the company and put them in the brewmaster program. This is a lady with a PhD and been there 15 years. So because you had to jump through all those hoops, you're going to require her to jump through every hoop you jump through. I said, that is insanity, but that's okay. I'll deal with it. So I sent for her. I said, here's what we're going to do. I said, I'm going to get you to go back to school and get an MBA. I'll get the company to pay for it. We'll get you in the program at WashU, and you get your MBA. When you come back with your MBA and your PhD, then I want you to apply for every sales and marketing job that comes up in this company. Because the truth of the matter is that Anheuser-Busch is a sales and marketing company. And so they view everything through the context of sales and marketing. So we did that with her. She did that. She got an MBA. She came back. They couldn't find a job for her. She said, well, what do you think I ought to do? I said, then start looking outside. Look outside. If they don't have a place for you, they will regret that they don't have a place for you. But there are plenty of places now with your PhD, your MBA, you can find a job in any place. That lady right now is somewhere out in Napa Valley, California, running some laboratory operation for some tea company out there because, and what is not done often enough is people in leadership positions developing people to go on to higher heights. I always felt that it was my job to make that happen. I'll tell you one other story because I know this can't go on forever. One day the chairman walked into my office and he said to me, Jake, you're going to have to take into your group the outreach programs. I had resisted taking those programs into my group for years because I didn't want anybody to think that I was still trying to be president of the National Urban League and I had just changed my address from New York to St. Louis. And so I would not take those groups into my operation. But he said, if you don't take them, then we're just going to disband the group. I didn't want all those folks dumped out on the street. So I said, I'll take them. So I got them all together after they had been assigned to me. And I met with them and I said, you know, I'm not just your best friend. I am your only friend. No other officer in this company wants you. But I also know why they don't want you. I know why they don't want you. They don't want you because you don't understand why your jobs exist. So I turned to the guy who, senior officer in the group, the vice president. I said, why do you think we have this group? He said, well, our job is to take this company out to the community. I said, that's precisely why nobody wants you. Nobody would pay you to do that. You do not understand what your job is. I said, your job is to bring that community to this company. We're a sales and marketing company. If you can't sell the product, you have no value to this company. In this company, in Anheuser-Busch, we separate people into two groups. There are numerator people and there are denominator people. Numerator people make money for the company. Denominator people spend it or give it away. I said, you're a denominator. I said, but I can show you how to become numerator. Simple. Here's what we're going to do with you. I'm going to send all of you out. I'm going to split you up. I'm going to send you out to meet with the senior officers of the company. And here's what I want you to say to them. I want you to say to them, tell me where you're trying to go in the next 12 to 15 to 18 months. And when they tell you, then you say to them, I'm going to show you I can help you get there. So it's very simple. Tell me where you're trying to go. When they tell you, you tell them, I'm going to show you I can help you get there. I said, because once you do that, you become numerator to them. I said, here's what happened. When I took over corporate communications, Anheuser-Busch had outsourced its communication activities to a PR firm for 50 years. And after I had been, and my predecessor liked it that way. So when a guy would tell me he was vice president of communications, what that really translated into was that he was managing the budget of the PR firm for the group of folks that he was responsible for. So one day I walked in the chairman's office and I said, Mr. Chairman, I'm bringing all communication activities in-house. He was startled. He said, what? Mm-hmm. He said, Jake, we've been with them for 50 years. I said, yeah, I know. And I've looked at what we're spending with them. I said, any given year, we may spend from $12 to $20 million with this firm. I can do it for 5 or less. Mm. And he said, well, I don't see how you're going to do that, but I'm willing to let you try. But you need to go over and let them know that you're taking the business away from them. So I went over to the company and I said to them, I'm bringing all my communication stuff in-house. And the guy who ran that company said to me, John, we've never sold Anheuser-Busch a service they didn't need. However, we have sold them services they could have done themselves. I said, well, I'm bringing it all in-house, but I know that presents a problem for you because you have this staff that has been working on our account. So one of the things I can do for you is to take some of that staff off your hand. So I hired the best people that we had working on our account. I paid them better. I gave them more benefits, and I had them 24/7. And $15 million dropped to the bottom line just by that act alone. And when that happened, folks suddenly started paying attention to this new guy who came from the outside and who has upset the way we do our business. Because when you're a new guy going into an operation, your job is to bring a new voice, new conversations, new perspectives, new ideas, and some innovation. I mean, that's the role of the new guy coming into this environment. And so as I began to operate in this company, the chairman began to recognize that I had value. Everything in corporate America is ultimately measured on the value you add to the operation. And so your challenge is to keep looking for ways that you can add value. And one of the things that I should say is that one way I established who I was in that company is my very first day on the job. In a big company like this, in a position like I had, you executive vice president, you inherit a lot of support staff, personal support staff, including an executive assistant. And so my predecessor's executive assistant came in to see me my first day on the job. And he said, I'm on vacation this week. I'm at a golf tournament, but I knew you were coming today. So I thought I would come in, just say hello and introduce myself. And I'm going back to the golf tournament. And I was like, oh, okay. All right. He said, I'll see you next Monday. So my personality is, I went around the executive floor introducing myself, and every place I stopped, they wanted to tell me what a terrible person this guy was. Every office I visited, they wanted to tell me what a terrible person this guy was, how he treated everybody below him. And so when he returned the following Monday, I sent for him. And I said to him, you know, while you were gone, I visited all the offices on this floor. And I said, and what I've discovered is that you're the most disliked person in this company. And I said, and because of that, I'm taking you out of this position. I said, now you can assume that I don't even believe what they told me. I said, assume, because I don't even know you. You can assume I don't even believe what they told me. I said, but I don't think you understand why a position like this exists. I said, do you think you understand? He said, well, I guess you're going to tell me. And I said, well, let me try to explain it to you this way. And I hope this is an X-rated podcast, because what I said to him was that in a position like this, if you work for an asshole and he gives you an asshole assignment and you carry it out in an asshole way, you've just become a bigger asshole than the one who gave you the assignment. Mm. I said, the reason you have a position like this is that when you get an asshole assignment, your job is to clean it up before you start delivering it out. I say, so clearly you don't understand why a position like this exists. I said, now you can assume I don't believe what they told me, but I'm taking you out of this position, not this job. I mean, not out of the company, but out of this job, because I cannot spend my time defending you when I have work to do. So I'll create a job for you. You just can't be my face. You cannot be my guy out there representing me. So I took him out of the position. But when I did that, it sent shockwaves through the organization. So then I said to people in my group, who's the smartest person in this group? Who's the smart? So a name kept popping up. I sent for her. I said, you just became my executive assistant. See, my philosophy is when you go into a new environment, you better get educated fast on what you're up against. And don't be afraid to be the student for a while. So I was willing to learn this business from folks who had been in this business and folks who have to carry out this business on a day-to-day basis. So when I sit around the table with folks in my group and I look out over the group and I raise the question as I did, who in here has marketing experience? And no hand goes up. I said, let me understand something. We are supposed to be in a position to provide a service to our marketing folks, but nobody has marketing experience. Then find me a marketer. And by the way, there got to be a black marketer out there that you can find. And so when that began to shake things up, and I'll make one other observation about positions like this. I maintain that people in positions like I had are not paid for the number of hours they put in a day. You cannot justify these salaries. You cannot justify this compensation based upon the hours that you put in. What they base it on is your judgment. You're getting paid for your judgment. And if you have bad judgment, you're overpaid. And so my position was always, how can I exercise the best judgment in these situations that we find ourselves in? But the other thing that I think people have to keep in mind is be nice, particularly to people below your position. So when my executive assistant walked in my office and asked me, who did I want to invite to my Christmas party? And I said, I'm having a Christmas party? She said, oh yeah, Mr. Jacob, all the senior officers hold Christmas parties. And I said, well, what's the budget? She said, I don't think you can overspend it. I said, okay, in that case, let me tell you how I wanted my Christmas party. I want all the people who work in executive dining room. I don't mean just the chef. I want the dishwasher. I want the waiters. I want the waitresses. I want the people who clean up the dining room. I want all the people from the dining room, everybody. I want you to invite them to my party. I want all the people who work in flight operations, not just the pilots. I want the secretaries, the mechanics. I want the people who clean up the hangar. I want all those people. I want all the people who work in security, not just the chief. I want all the folks who are walking the grounds. I want all those folks invited to the party. I want the barber and the manicurist. I want all those folks invited to my party. She said, are you serious? I said, yeah. She said, why? I said, see, what you guys don't understand, it is those folks to make our job easier for us to do. Those are the folks who make it easier for us to do our job. And those folks need to know that we appreciate and respect what they contribute to what we are doing. And so I had 500 people. And I said, by the way, since I have this budget, send everybody a gift from Tiffany's. And I did that every year that I was at Anheuser-Busch. See, my belief, my feeling, my argument is that leadership is about leading, not about trying to be a member of the group. I mean, if you're supposed to be leading, then lead. And so what that also means, though, is don't be afraid to fail. I was never afraid to fail. And I never saw any mistakes I made as a lost cause, because I learned something from my mistakes. And I learned how not to do stuff, stupid stuff, from the mistakes that I may have made. And so I believe, frankly, that if I had tried to follow the plan that I had made for my own life, I would have failed miserably. There is a God someplace who said, you know what, I'm going to help this guy out because I can see if I don't step in and make a path for him, he can screw this whole thing up. And so what I did with each place I found myself was to try to be the best I could be in the role that I found myself in. And so when I walked out of Anheuser-Busch in 2008, I left with giving one piece of advice to the new management that they didn't follow, and it cost them. What I said to them at my last board meeting, they made a presentation that they had made a deal to distribute InBev's products on our trucks. InBev was a small Belgium company run by a bunch of bankers. And I said to those guys, because the policy when I was there, under our management, the chairman that we had during my time, the CEO, is that we didn't put anybody else's products on our trucks. You saw an Anheuser-Busch truck, it was Anheuser-Busch products. So they made this deal because we were all retiring, the chairman, the president of the beer company, and I, to do this deal with InBev to put their products on our trucks. And it's true that Anheuser-Busch's weakness was imports. We always had a weak portfolio on imports, other than Corona, and because we owned a piece of group of Modelo. But when they made this presentation that they were going to do this deal with InBev, I said to the CEO, I said, that's a big mistake. I said, what you need to understand is that Anheuser-Busch for 150 years has been run by brewers. Brewers make stuff. InBev is run by bankers. Bankers buy stuff. You let those guys in your house, they'll own you. 2 months after they got in, they made an unsolicited bid on the company. And this is 2008, when the financial market was in the toilet all over the world. These guys, these are bankers. These guys are big-time gamblers. They made an offer for this company to buy the company. And their first offer was $65 a share. The stock at the time had to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 50, 54. And the then board turned it down. They came back with an offer of $70 a share, all cash. Now, that's a $52 billion transaction. And the financial market all over the world was in the toilet. These guys gambled that they could raise $52 billion in that down market. And they did. And they closed that deal November 18 in 2008. Now, the truth of the matter is that those of us who were sitting there with all kinds of options cleaned up, and we made money in the process. But it was a deal that never, in my judgment, had to happen. If we had just understood that if there's any buying, we should be buying them, not them buying us. But look, I had a great run, and I have no reasons to regret any of the moves I've made because they panned out, or I was able to make them pan out. And I was very fortunate and very lucky, and met some great people along the way.
I'm rarely someone who has a lack of a retort, but you have poured so much into me and definitely into the audience about your story. It's just otherworldly. It's been incredible. The gems of knowledge and wisdom are just unmatched. And I thank you.
Let me make one other observation, because you raised the issue on mentors.
Yes.
And here's my thought about that. No one is guaranteed a promised mentor. And if you are lucky enough to get one, then treasure it. But if you don't, then mentor yourself. You're not guaranteed to get one. If you get one, treasure it. But if you don't, then mentor yourself. Because see, the generations before never had mentors. My generation came along at a time that we didn't have Black folks in corporate America to mentor. I mean, Black folks were just getting corporate America during my time. And so there were not a lot of mentors out there. And so what you had to do, you had to get out there and fend for yourself. And if somebody did end up mentoring you, that is a treasure. But if they don't, then you mentor yourself.
Yeah. Dare I ask if you have any further closing remarks, or do we bring this to a conclusion just yet?
You know, I have not done any incisive talking for a long time, but I still have people that I'm mentoring. And how I end up mentoring folks is that they make me mentor them. You know, but when I look back on the folks that I have encountered, they want to be successful. See, in this world, you got to want it. I mean, you really got to want it. I mean, there are no guarantees that somebody's going to just give it to you. You know, I'm a weird kind of guy. In all those years I was at Anheuser-Busch, I never spent my time hanging out with the other officers in the company other than the chairman. We have an executive dining room. I never went to lunch with any of those guys because I understood that this was not my fraternity. I was just an observer of their fraternity, but I chose to make the best of what I was observing. And even as an outsider, to make them know that I was there. See, it didn't bother me that I wasn't getting invited into their fraternity. What bothered them is that I didn't need to be in their fraternity because I was clear on why I was there. And I was clear that at the end of the day, I had to make it happen. And if I did, they would have to deal with me. And even today, about once a year, we spend a weekend with the chairman of the company. And because competence breeds friendships and relationships based on your competencies. And so I am happy that along the way, I was able to interact with people that wanted to be successful. And I understood if I could make them successful, they would make me successful. And that's what management is all about. How can you develop your people to be successful? Because their success accumulates to you. And don't be greedy about taking credit for everything. Share the credit with the folks who really made it happen. And the rewards will be there for you. And so I was going to show you, I'll end with this. I was going to show you Success is not simply the heights that you obtain, but it's also the depths from which you've come. And I told you about this house that I moved in. When my family moved into it, it was the second house when we thought we were moving up because it had a toilet on the back porch. Mm. And I had lived in a house with an outhouse in the front yard, just 2 doors down. This was the house we thought when we were moving up to.
Wow.
That was 2507 Pierce. And we thought when we moved into that house that we had moved up because we had a toilet on the back porch. So it's not simply the heights that you obtain, but it's also the depths from which you've come. And if folks understand that, then they can be successful too.
Here. My guest today is Bijani Jacob. I think there's not much more for me to add. You've been listening to my brother podcast, and my name is Laulu Davies Yemerton. Going through thick and thin, brothers, you gonna win. I'm so